My name is Julia Monroe, and I gave up everything. My house, my savings, my peace of mind, to care for a father who couldn't even say thank you. Meanwhile, my brother Zach was out buying cufflinks and bragging about board meetings. But last fall, as he moved into the house I paid to save, I handed him an envelope, $88,000 worth of receipts. You owe me, I said before I walked out for good. Where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. And if you've ever been the one doing everything for family while someone else got all the praise, this story is for you. It was raining hard that Sunday afternoon in Cleveland, the kind of cold, slanting November rain that makes the air feel like it's pressing in on you. The living room smelled like mothballs and heating oil, same as it always had in my parents' house. But that day, it felt more like a battlefield than a family home. Zach stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, his slick designer coat still on. His hair was neatly combed back, not a strand out of place. He looked like he was about to walk into a stockholders' meeting, not into a crisis with our father who just had his third stroke. You're unbelievable, I said, my voice cracking as I pointed toward the hallway where Dad's oxygen machine hissed steadily. You're seriously going to just leave, Zach? He sighed and shrugged, like this was all mildly inconvenient, like I was a server who'd brought him the wrong appetizer. I've got a job, Jules, I've got a life, I'm not changing diapers. He's your father too, I shouted, louder than I meant to. My throat tightened immediately after. You can't just walk away. Zach rolled his eyes and turned toward the door like the conversation was over. You always liked being the martyr, enjoy it. I don't know what hit harder, his words or the way Mom winced behind him, like I'd broken something fragile by speaking too loudly. My mother, Anne Monroe, stood half-shadowed in the kitchen doorway, her fingers twitching at the dish towel in her hands. This isn't helping, Julia, she whispered. Please, you're upsetting him. Upsetting him? I turned toward her, my voice raw now. He hasn't visited once in 2 months. I've been here every day, making sure Dad eats, takes his meds, doesn't fall out of bed. I haven't worked a full week in months. And you're worried about his feelings. She looked down, folding the dish towel tighter and tighter in her hands. The silence between us thickened into something permanent. My hands were shaking, whether from anger or just exhaustion I couldn't tell, probably both. Zach grabbed the doorknob. He was never a good father anyway, he said, not even looking back. You're the only one still pretending. The door shut behind him with a muted finality, like it had absorbed the weight of our entire childhood in one soft thud. I stood there, stunned, breath caught in my throat. The air in the room was too still, like everything had paused. In the corner, the old clock ticked mockingly. And then Dad coughed in the hallway, long, rattling, and my body jolted back to motion. I walked toward his room, passing Mom without saying another word. She didn't move either. Just stood there holding that towel, like maybe she could scrub this whole moment clean if she just held on tight enough. I didn't sleep that night. Even when I lay on the couch downstairs with the TV muttering in the background, my brain kept circling back to that scene. Zach's indifference, Mom's silence, the sheer wrongness of it all. But even more haunting than their actions was the thought I couldn't shake. Maybe they expected this from me. Maybe they counted on me being the one who stayed, who showed up, who sacrificed. Maybe that's why it was so easy for Zach to walk away. He knew I'd pick up the pieces. And the worst part, he was right. But not forever, not this time. The next few days blurred into one long loop of tasks no one ever thanked me for. The kitchen table was buried in pill organizers, appointment cards, and insurance forms. The linoleum curled up at the corners from years of foot traffic and heat. I moved through the house like a nurse on autopilot, checking Dad's blood pressure, blending his protein shakes, setting timers for medications he wouldn't remember to take unless I stood right in front of him. I'd set up a spreadsheet on my laptop to keep track of everything. Dosages, times, what worked and what didn't. No one else asked for access. No one else seemed to care how the details added up to someone's entire life. That afternoon, I was in the kitchen, crushing one of Dad's calcium pills into applesauce. Mom was behind me at the counter folding towels like we were just two women in a laundry commercial. Domestic, quiet, forgettable. You don't have to do all this, she said softly, still folding. I didn't turn around. Someone has to, she paused, hands resting on a pale blue towel. We could look into a nurse, a part-time helper maybe. I bit back a laugh, dry and bitter. With what money? The silence that followed was answer enough. I scraped the applesauce into a small plastic dish and grabbed a spoon. As I passed Mom on the way out of the kitchen, I noticed she was folding the same towel for the second time. Her hands trembled slightly. Dad was in his recliner, watching a muted golf game and fiddling with the blanket around his legs. He didn't look up when I came in, didn't acknowledge me at all. "Here," I said, setting the applesauce on the tray beside him. "What is it?" He muttered, eyes fixed on the screen. "Applesauce with your calcium and blood pressure meds." He reached for the spoon, grumbling. "Cold." "It's supposed to be," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "It's been out for less than a minute." He didn't respond, just shoveled a spoonful into his mouth like it was a punishment. I stood there watching him eat, this man who used to mow the lawn every Saturday, who once built me a bookshelf when I was 9 and obsessed with Nancy Drew. That man was buried under layers of aging skin and stubborn pride, and I wasn't sure I'd ever find him again. When he finished, he pushed the tray away without looking at me. Not a word, not even a grunt of acknowledgement. I picked up the tray and turned to leave. "Don't forget to take the trash out," he said as I walked through the doorway. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a thank you, just an order thrown like a bone to a dog. I stood there for a second, still holding the tray. Then I walked into the kitchen and set it down harder than I meant to. The clang of the spoon rattling against the plastic echoed through the room. Mom flinched but didn't say anything. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time all day. She still had that towel in her hands, folding it again and again like if she stopped, the house would fall apart. "Do you think I'm doing too much?" I asked. She didn't answer. "Because it feels like you resent me for it," I added, quieter now. She turned to the sink and started rinsing out a coffee mug. "I just don't want you burning out, that's all." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "Then why does it feel like you're waiting for me to fail?" She stopped scrubbing. The faucet ran. She stared down into the sink. "You were always the one who fixed things," she said finally. "Even as a little girl, you cleaned up your brother's messes, you reminded me of appointments, you made things easier." "And Zach?" I asked. "What was he?" She turned off the faucet, dried her hands slowly. "He was the one who needed more." I leaned back against the counter, cold to my core. "So, because he needed and I gave, that's just how it had to be forever." She didn't answer. But in the silence, I heard the truth settle between us like dust. I went upstairs and closed the door to my old bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed that still had the same faded floral comforter from high school. I looked at the stack of insurance claim forms and grocery receipts in my bag and suddenly felt so small. Everything I had given, my time, my money, my energy, was invisible. And yet if I stopped tomorrow, the whole house would fall apart. But no one would thank me for keeping it together. They'd just blame me when it broke. That night I stood on the porch alone, arms crossed against the chill. The sky was dark, clouds heavy over Lake Erie, and the street lamps buzzed faintly. I could still hear Zach's voice echoing in my mind. "You always liked being the martyr." As if that was a choice. As if stepping up meant I enjoyed watching my life dissolve while he skated away untouched. I took out my phone and opened my calendar. The blocks of appointments stretched on for weeks: cardiology follow-up, PT sessions, oxygen refills, and so many yellow highlighted days labeled "call insurance again." No time off. No weekends. No applause. Just responsibility wrapped in silence. I clicked open my banking app next. I had $14.92 in checking and barely more in savings. "Someone has to," I'd said. But did it always have to be me? I came home that night to the soft hum of machines and the smell of boiled cabbage. Not my home, theirs. My real home was a narrow apartment above a dry cleaner on Detroit Avenue. You could hear the dryers spinning at all hours, and once a week, the power flickered when the machines below overloaded the circuit. Still, it was mine. Every creaky stair and chipped windowpane reminded me I had built something of my own. Now it felt like a ghost of a life I used to live. I dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter and turned on the lamp. A stack of folders waited on the coffee table, grant proposals for a clinical research study I'd been managing before everything spiraled. I hadn't touched them in 3 days. The deadline was tonight. Midnight, I sat down and opened my laptop. Its cracked hinge let out a tiny wheeze as I tilted the screen. I tried to focus. Paragraphs, data sets, just get it done, I told myself. But I could feel the resentment rising again like a fever, slow and sticky, impossible to ignore. Zach hadn't even texted since he walked out. Not to ask how Dad was doing. Not to see if Mom needed anything. not even to pretend to care. And the worst part, they still adored him. Mom spoke of him like he was a tired soldier at war, so busy, so burdened, so brave for showing up at all. Dad barely spoke a word to me unless it was to complain, but whenever Zach visited on the rare occasions he did, you'd think the Pope had walked through the door. I stared at the screen and whispered to the empty room. Even now, they still think Zach is the golden one. The words sat there in the air like smoke. I glanced at the clock. 10:41 p.m. The grant was due at midnight. Somewhere in the unit below, a dryer thudded into a spin cycle. My couch creaked as I leaned back, eyes burning from too little sleep and too much pretending. I didn't know when exactly I'd stopped being their daughter and started being the backup plan. I'd worked so hard for this life. Finished nursing school with top honors. Got a fellowship in neurodegenerative research. Landed a stable position in a hospital where people actually looked me in the eye and said thank you. I was building something, brick by brick. Then the call came. Dad had collapsed at the grocery store, stroke. He survived, but barely. The doctors said he'd need full-time care for months, maybe longer. Zach offered to fly in for a weekend. I moved home the next morning. I thought it was temporary. I thought I could do it all, keep my job, keep my apartment, keep my life. I was wrong. That was 11 months ago. I hit save on the document at exactly 11:56 p.m. The grant report was finished. Barely. I stared at the words on the final page and felt nothing. No pride, no relief, just a dull throb behind my eyes. Somewhere in the building, someone was playing old jazz through the walls. It sounded like something from my childhood, something Dad might have played in the garage while tinkering with broken radios. I wondered if he remembered those days. Or if I was the only one still trying to hold the pieces together. A month later, my dining table looked like it belonged to someone twice my age and 3 times as tired. Papers everywhere, medical bills, rehab invoices, pharmacy printouts, insurance denials. A financial graveyard. I sat in the middle of it all, elbows on the table, forehead resting in my palms. My townhouse, my one piece of stability, had become the next line item in a long list of sacrifices no one would ever acknowledge. A knock sounded at the door. I stood, wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater, and opened it to see Monica Reyes, my realtor, standing there with her neat black blazer and a sympathy-soft smile. We'd gone to high school together, though barely more than acquaintances back then. Today, she wore the expression of someone arriving to help bury something. "Julia," she asked gently, "you still okay with everything we talked about?" "No, absolutely not," but I nodded anyway. "Come in." We sat at the dining table and she carefully pushed aside a stack of envelopes so she could set down her tablet. Her movements were slow, almost ceremonial, as if not to spook me. I appreciated that. "So," she began, tapping the screen, "I drafted the listing agreement. Market's good right now, very good actually. We'll have offers quickly." She hesitated. "Once it's listed, things move fast. I want to make sure you feel solid about your decision." Solid, funny word. I felt like wet sand. I tried to answer, but my throat closed up. I covered it with a cough, pretending the emotion creeping up my spine was just a tight chest. "It's for Dad," I said finally. "Physical therapy bills doubled last month. His medication copay is insane. And insurance isn't covering the in-home nursing anymore." I gestured vaguely at the chaos of paperwork. "I can't keep up. Selling the townhouse is the only way." Monica's eyes softened. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." I let out a humorless breath. "Shouldn't, but that doesn't change anything." She looked at me with a kindness that made the back of my eyes sting. "I'm going to make sure you get the best price possible," she said. "We'll make this as painless as we can." Painless, another funny word. I reached for the pen she slid toward me. My hand shook. Signing those papers felt like cutting off a limb. By the time the ink dried, I'd officially put my first home, my one piece of independence, up for sale. The place where I'd celebrated promotions, thrown housewarming parties, hosted wine nights with friends I now barely saw, because I was always at my parents' house putting out fires. Monica stood. "Why don't we step outside? I'll put the sign up now if that's okay." I nodded numb. We walked out onto the small front lawn. The air was crisp, early spring in Cleveland, icy but promising warmth if you were patient. I wasn't patient anymore. I was running on fumes. Monica pulled a stake and signed from her trunk, "For sale, REYES Realty." The metal clinked against pavement. "Where do you want it?" she asked. I pointed to the left side of the yard, not trusting my voice. She hammered it into the soft earth with practiced taps. Tap, tap, tap. Each one struck something inside me. When she stepped away, the sign stood bright and new, announcing to the world what I hadn't yet admitted to myself. I was giving up my life to save a man who didn't even call me by my full name anymore. My eyes blurred. I blinked hard, but the tears fell anyway, hot against the cold air. They slid down my cheeks before I could stop them. "I'm sorry," Monica said quietly. "I know this is hard." "I thought," I whispered, "that the hardest part would be deciding. But watching that sign go up," my voice broke. "It feels like I'm disappearing, piece by piece." She didn't try to hug me or offer clichés. She just stood beside me, letting me gather myself. When I finally wiped my face, she gave a small nod. "I'll call you as soon as we get interest. You're doing something incredibly generous, Julia." Generous. Another word that felt like it belonged to someone else. When she left, I stayed on the porch, staring at the sign, hugging my arms around myself against the wind. My throat tightened all over again. I'd worked so hard for that house, and now it was just another sacrifice swallowed by the past year. I whispered the truth out loud, even though no one was there to hear it. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." But the answer didn't matter. Because tomorrow I'd be up early, at my parents' house, doing it all again. Moving back into my childhood bedroom felt like stepping into an old photograph, one where everyone else had moved on, but I'd somehow stayed frozen. The pink wallpaper my mom refused to repaint, the dent in the dresser from when Zach and I used to wrestle, the creaky floorboard near the window, it all felt smaller now. Too small for the woman I'd become. Just right for the girl they still expected me to be. That evening, the kitchen smelled like garlic and simmering tomato sauce. For a moment, it almost felt warm, familiar, until the conversation started. Mom stood at the stove stirring pasta, humming like we were living in a commercial for Family Harmony. Dad was at the table, flipping through a newspaper he never actually read. His oxygen machine pulsed in the background, a steady reminder of why I was here. I opened the cabinet above the sink, reaching for plates. My hands were still shaky from signing away my house earlier that week. Dad didn't look up. "You're putting the wrong ones out," he muttered. "These are the ones Mom told me. The blue ones," he interrupted sharply. "The blue ones are for dinner." Mom sighed without turning around. "They're all the same, George." But he was already glaring at me over the rim of his glasses as if I'd personally sabotaged the evening. I set the plates down a little harder than I intended. Mom shot me a warning glance. The tension thickened like the sauce she was stirring. Finally, I broke. "I sold my house," I blurted, unable to keep it in any longer. Mom froze mid-stir. Dad lowered his newspaper but didn't say anything. "I sold my house," I repeated louder this time, "so we could cover Dad's meds, the new therapy bills, the in-home nurse, all of it." Silence. Mom turned back to the pot as if I'd said I'd bought new socks. "Julia, honey, dinner is almost ready. We can talk about that later." "No," I said, pulse hammering. "We're talking about it now." Dad shifted in his chair, jaw tightening. "That's what had to be done," he grumbled. "Stop making a show of it." A show, a show. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "I gave up my home, the only thing I owned. I'm back sleeping in my childhood room because I'm paying for everything and you can't even say thank you," Dad scoffed. "You want a parade?" Mom finally turned around, her voice soft but dismissive. "Let's not ruin dinner, Julia." "But it's already ruined," I shot back. "Do you even hear yourselves? I'm drowning trying to keep this house afloat and you're acting like I've inconvenienced you." Dad snapped. "You think you're the only one who's suffered here. Try losing half your body to a stroke." The guilt punched me straight in the chest. For a second, I had no words. Mom used the moment to step in. "Julia, we appreciate everything you do." "No, you don't," I said quietly. "You don't, otherwise you'd show it, even once." Mom's eyes flickered, uneasy. Like she wanted to comfort me but had forgotten how. "And Dad," he just lifted the newspaper again like the conversation bored him. My voice cracked. "If Zach had done even a quarter of what I've done, you'd treat him like a hero." Dad didn't lower the paper. "Zach has a demanding job. He doesn't have time for all this. You've always been more domestic." Domestic, not accomplished, not dedicated, just convenient. I swallowed hard and stepped back, the kitchen spinning a little. "So," I whispered, "everything I've sacrificed, it means nothing." Mom reached over and patted my arm lightly, absently like I was a fussy child. "Let's not ruin dinner," she repeated. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, decisive shift, a click of realization. They weren't going to see me, not now, not ever. I could turn myself inside out for them, and they'd still find a way to make it my fault, too emotional, too dramatic, too much. I took the plates, blue ones, to avoid another complaint and walked them to the table. No one said thank you. No one said they were sorry. But I noticed something as I placed the last fork on the table. I didn't feel guilty anymore. Just tired. Bone-deep tired. And somewhere under the exhaustion, a tiny spark of something new, something dangerous, began to glow. The same spark that would, months later, drive me to place that envelope of receipts in Zach's ungrateful hands and walk away without looking back. The house looked deceptively cheerful that Christmas. String lights blinked unevenly across the living room window. Tinsel clung to the banister like it had since the 90s, and someone, probably Mom, had set out the ceramic nativity scene on the hallway table. Everything was exactly as it had always been. Except me. I moved through the day like a shadow, doing dishes, helping Dad into his armchair, adjusting the thermostat because he said it was freezing, even though the heat was on full blast. And then they arrived. Zach with his cologne and swagger and too loud laugh. Taylor, his wife, with that expensive coat and a gift bag swinging from each hand. "Jules," Zach beamed, like we hadn't nearly screamed each other into silence a few weeks ago. "You look tired." Mom rushed to greet them like they were royalty returning from exile. She kissed Zach's cheek, took Taylor's bags, fussed over their coats. Even Dad perked up a little, grinning the crooked half-smile he reserved for his son. I stood behind the kitchen counter, half listening, half bracing. Every year was the same. Zach showed up late, brought store-bought wine, and left with praise echoing behind him. I showed up exhausted, carrying everyone else's weight, and left with dishes to wash and a migraine. But this year was different, because this year I'd sold my house. This year I'd lived out of boxes and kept track of 16 different medications, and no one had noticed I was unraveling. Dinner was tense, in that polite way families do, forks scraping plates, conversations that sounded like commercials. Zach told a story about a new client. Taylor laughed at all the right moments. Dad nodded along like it meant something to him. I said nothing, just passed the mashed potatoes. Then came the presents. Mom handed out carefully wrapped boxes, all tagged in her cursive handwriting. Taylor got a new purse. Zach a smart watch. Dad received a fleece blanket with his initials embroidered. And me, there was nothing in the pile, not a single box, not a card, not even a joke about how hard I was to shop for. I waited, quietly, smiling the way you do when your throat is closing and there's gravy on the carpet. Taylor was the one who noticed. She paused, mid-unwrap, and looked around. "Wait, where's Julia's?" The room stilled. Mom glanced at the floor, suddenly very interested in a ribbon. "Oh, I guess we forgot." Dad cleared his throat and reached for another roll. Zach kept sipping his wine, either oblivious or pretending to be. A beat of silence passed, thick as wool, and then I laughed, not bitter, not loud, just a soft little exhale of disbelief. I stood up and picked up the empty plate in front of me. "I'll get started on the dishes." "Julia," Taylor started, but I waved her off with a smile so well practiced it felt like armor. "It's fine, really." It wasn't. In the kitchen, I scrubbed harder than I needed to. The water ran too hot, burning my knuckles red. I focused on the plates, the silverware, the suds. Anything to avoid thinking about the fact that I had been erased from my own family's celebration. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? Not forgotten. Erased. They had gathered in the same room I spent a year holding together, and I was a background character in their story. A convenience, a fixture, a ghost. I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed to. Eventually, Taylor came in holding 2 mugs of cocoa and a hesitant expression. "I don't think they meant to hurt you," she said, handing me a mug. I took it, grateful more for the company than the drink. "They just forget things," she added. I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were kind. "Too kind for this family." "You noticed," I said. She nodded. "I always do." And for the first time all day I felt seen, even just for a second. The next morning the house was quiet in that post-holiday way, wrapping paper stuffed into trash bags, leftover pie covered with foil, and the faint smell of pine needles clinging to everything. I'd slept badly in my childhood room, tossing between resentment and exhaustion, half dreaming of the life I used to have in my townhouse. When I padded downstairs, Taylor was already in the kitchen, hair in a loose braid, wearing one of Zach's oversized sweaters. She was folding laundry at the table, my chore, the one I usually did while everyone else napped or watched TV. "Morning," she said softly when she saw me. "Morning." I reached for a coffee mug, but paused when I noticed she'd already set one out for me, steaming, light cream, 2 sugars. Exactly how I took it. "You remembered," I said, a little surprised. Taylor shrugged. "I pay attention to adults who behave like adults." I huffed a quiet laugh. "That's rare around here." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. For a moment, we folded towels side by side in silence. The sun cast pale streaks through the window, landing on the worn tile floor. I watched her fold my dad's flannel pajama pants with care, far more care than he ever showed toward anything I did for him. Finally, she cleared her throat and held out a small box wrapped in navy paper. Not Christmas paper, just something tasteful from a local boutique. "I wanted to give you this earlier," she said. "But well, last night wasn't the right moment." I blinked. "Taylor, you didn't have to, I know." She placed it gently into my hands. "That's why I wanted to." The paper tore softly as I opened it, revealing a delicate silver necklace with a tiny charm shaped like an open book. It was simple and beautiful, exactly my style. My voice caught. "It's lovely." "It reminded me of you," she said. "Someone who carries more stories than she ever tells." Something inside me loosened, like I'd been holding my breath for months without realizing it. "No one's ever said that about me," I admitted. Taylor's expression softened. "No one in this house says anything that matters. But I see what you do for them, Julia, every day, and it doesn't go unnoticed. Not by me." My throat tightened again, but this time in a way that felt healing instead of bruising. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Really." She reached out and touched my arm just briefly. "You deserve to be appreciated. I'm sorry they don't know how." A door upstairs slammed, and Zach's voice boomed across the hallway, complaining about a missing belt or a wrong coffee order or something equally unimportant. Taylor closed her eyes for a second, and I saw something flicker across her face: tiredness, frustration, maybe even regret. "I should go help him," she said, though she sounded anything but eager. "Taylor," I said, stopping her before she left the kitchen. "If you ever need a break from this family or just someone to talk to," she gave me a real smile this time, "I know where to find you." As she stepped out of the kitchen, I stayed where I was, fingers brushing the little book charm. It sparkled faintly in the morning light. For the first time in months, I felt seen. Not for what I provided, not for what I sacrificed, but for who I was. It was a small moment. Quiet, domestic, easily overlooked by everyone else in the house. But for me, it was something like hope. A reminder that kindness still existed, that someone, at least one person, recognized the invisible weight I carried every single day. And it planted a seed inside me. A small one but sturdy. If Taylor could see me, maybe one day I'd see myself again too. I should have known something was coming. Dad had been quieter than usual all day. Not his usual grumpy silent, but a kind of rehearsed silence, like he was building up to a speech and didn't want to mess up the delivery. He barely grunted during breakfast and asked for his lunch early, which was odd since he normally complained about eating before 1. I noticed the envelope first, sticking out of the drawer near his recliner. It wasn't addressed, but I saw the corner of something official peeking out. The lawyer's letterhead from 3 towns over. He caught me looking. "Can you gather everyone in the living room?" he said flatly. I hesitated. "For what?" He didn't answer. Just adjusted his blanket and stared straight ahead at the muted television. I got Mom from the kitchen. Zach and Taylor were upstairs. It felt like pulling everyone into a courtroom, not a living room. A cold weight settled in my chest before a word was even said. We sat, Zach lounging, Taylor politely straight-backed, Mom on the edge of the ottoman like a kid waiting to be scolded. I sat across from Dad, the coffee table between us feeling like a barrier. He cleared his throat, and that was when I knew. "This won't take long," he began. "I finalized my will last week." Mom gasped slightly. Taylor's hand tightened on Zach's knee. Zach smirked, like he already knew how this was going to go. "I've decided," Dad continued, "that the house and everything in it will go to Zach." Silence. No one breathed. I stared at him, not quite believing the words had formed in the air and stayed there. I glanced at Mom. Her lips were pressed tight, eyes on the floor. Taylor looked like someone had just dropped a glass in her lap. Zach raised his eyebrows like he was surprised, but not really. "Wow, thanks, Dad," I blinked, swallowed, then found my voice. "What?" Dad shifted in his chair, not looking at me. "Zach has a family now, he needs the stability." I shook my head. "I gave up everything. I moved back. I've been here every day. Every appointment, every prescription pickup, every nurse call. I sold my house. I sold my house so you could stay in this one. You're not being reasonable, he said, still without looking at me. You're single, you'll be fine. Zach has a wife, plans, he needs it more. I laughed, short and sharp. Plans? He shows up for photo ops and leaves the second it's inconvenient. Meanwhile, I'm spoon-feeding you soup and calling insurance companies at 2 a.m., but sure, he needs it more. Dad shifted again, uncomfortable now. Don't make this about money. It's not about money, I snapped. It's about value, and apparently I don't have any. Zach leaned back in the armchair. Come on, Jules, don't make a scene. Taylor's eyes darted to mine, wide with something between guilt and apology. I stood, heart hammering. I hope it was worth it, I said. Every minute I poured into this house, into you, into this family. Dad picked up the remote and pointed it at the TV. Like I wasn't even standing there. The screen lit up, a golf tournament just like that. I walked out to the porch, the cold air biting my skin, but I barely felt it. My breath came out in clouds. The sky above Cleveland was flat and gray, and the neighborhood was still dressed in holiday lights. It felt surreal. I had given up everything for them, and they had handed it all, gift-wrapped, to the one person who had done nothing. No, not nothing. He had left. And they rewarded him for it. I sat down on the porch step and stared out at the street. At my future, apparently. One without a home, without recognition, without a single person in that house saying, "You matter." But something inside me didn't break this time. It hardened. They wanted to erase what I'd done. Pretend it had no weight, but I had the receipts. Literally. And I was done being quiet. The next morning felt like moving through wet cement. I packed in silence, folding my clothes into boxes I'd borrowed from the pharmacy where I picked up Dad's meds. How ironic, repacking my life with the same hands that spent a year saving theirs. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. The ache had burned itself down to something clean and cold. Mom knocked once on my door but didn't come in. She left a plate of toast on the floor outside. No words, no apology. Just her signature avoidance served on ceramic. By 10 a.m., the hallway was full of suitcases. Not mine, Zach's. His bags were brand new, glossy, coordinated. He stood near the front door, directing Taylor like he was checking into a hotel. She moved slowly, not quite meeting my eyes. Are you sure we should do this today? She whispered to him once, unaware I was behind them in the hall. It's already done, he muttered back. Dad wants us here. We're the ones taking over now. We're the ones taking over. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard it nearly bled. I said nothing. I just finished taping my last box shut. When I turned to leave, Zach stood half blocking the front door. You know, he began, shifting his weight like he was doing me a favor, if you need a place for a bit, the basement's got that old futon. I stared at him, that smug, performative pity painted across his face. Offering me a corner of the house I paid to preserve, I smiled, just barely, and handed him an envelope. He frowned. What's this? You might want to look at it, I said. He opened it right there in the hallway. I watched his expression as he scanned the first page, then the second. Then the receipts began to fall out, neatly organized, stapled, itemized down to the penny. Pharmacy copays, rehab equipment, nursing hours, oxygen tank refills, hospital parking fees, groceries, gas bills, $88,000. I didn't need to speak. The numbers said everything I never got to. His face flushed, the cocky air draining out of him. You're joking, right? I shrugged. Nope, that's what I paid to keep this house afloat. Since I'm no longer welcome here, I figured it's your turn to step up. Taylor stepped closer, peeking at the pages in his hands, her lips parted in disbelief. Is this real? I nodded. Every receipt has a date, everyone backed by my bank statement. I kept track because I knew, eventually, this day would come. Zach opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. He looked at Mom, who had just appeared in the hallway. She looked at the envelope, at me, at the suitcase by the door. She didn't say anything. Of course she didn't. Zach's voice sharpened. You really expect me to pay this? I met his eyes. No, I expect you to figure it out, the way I had to. I picked up my box and stepped past him, brushing his shoulder as I walked through the front door for the last time. No tears. No apologies. Just clean air and sky and the satisfying sound of my boots hitting the porch. Behind me the silence stretched long. Long enough for it to settle in. I wasn't the one left behind anymore. I loaded the last of my things into the back seat of my car. My laptop bag, my stethoscope. the tiny box from Taylor still tucked safely in my coat pocket. Before I pulled away, I looked up at the window to my old bedroom. It felt like looking into someone else's life. Someone who used to say yes before she even knew the question. That girl was gone. I didn't wait for them to call after me, didn't hope for a change of heart. Just turned the key in the ignition and drove off. It was done. And for once, the only person I owed anything to was me. Zach's voice echoed down the driveway like a hornet trapped in a jar. "You're joking, right?" I didn't stop, didn't turn around, didn't flinch. He stood on the porch, waving the envelope over his head like it was a personal attack. The papers fluttered, fragile under his panicked grip. "Where do you expect me to get this kind of money?" he yelled after me. "Julia, come on," the nerve. I slid behind the wheel and closed the car door with quiet finality. The window was already cracked. I didn't want to miss it, the sound of him realizing, for the first time, what consequences felt like. Because it wasn't just about money. It was about weight, and for once he was finally being asked to carry some of it. Mom stood just behind him, eyes scanning the receipts now splayed across the porch bench. Taylor was still at the threshold, arms crossed, her face unreadable but not confused. She knew. She'd seen the exhaustion in my face, the way my hands shook from fatigue some nights, the silence I carried because if I ever started yelling, I wasn't sure I'd stop. Zach stormed down the steps. "You blindsided me with this." He snapped, voice cracking. "You never said anything about paying you back." I rolled the window down just an inch, met his gaze through the glass. "That's funny," I said calmly, "because I never said you could move in either." That shut him up. He stepped back like I'd slapped him. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I just looked at him the way he always looked at me, like someone watching a stranger they barely respected. Then I rolled up the window and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, I watched Zach slowly turn, jaw tight, as Mom picked up one of the receipts and started reading. Taylor said something I couldn't hear, and Zach whipped his head toward her like she'd just betrayed him too. "Good, let the storm begin." Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Taylor, he didn't tell me about the will until after. I'm sorry, I didn't agree with it." I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "Me, I know. You're the only one who didn't pretend not to see me." She responded a minute later. "Taylor, it's already falling apart. Just so you know." That made me pause. I almost asked what she meant, but I didn't need to. Zach had no idea what he'd walked into. The oxygen tanks, the nurse scheduling, the 2-hour pharmacy calls just to fight for a $15 copay reimbursement. He thought he'd inherited a house. What he inherited was a full-time job with no paycheck and a father who refused to be grateful for anything. And me, I was free. By morning, the voicemail on my phone was full. "Zach, I think you've made your point, Julia. Mom, please, we can work something out, don't be so cold." Zach again, "We'll need to figure out how to split this. I can't take it all on." That last one, I saved it. Because that was what I'd been screaming, silently, through action and sacrifice for over a year. I can't take it all on, but they didn't hear me when I was crumbling, only when I left. Funny how loud silence becomes once you're not there to fill it anymore. 2 weeks passed, long enough for silence to settle, not long enough for them to replace me. I didn't reach out, didn't check in, didn't ask if Zach had figured out the rotating pharmacy schedule or the real cost of adult diapers and incontinence pads that insurance never covered. He hadn't. Taylor confirmed it. We met at a tiny cafe tucked between a used bookstore and a florist, somewhere neither of our families would think to look. She arrived in a rust-colored coat, scarf knotted tight, makeup-free for the first time since I'd known her. And tired. The kind of tired I recognized in the mirror most days. I already had her coffee waiting, black, 2 sugars. She slid into the chair across from me and let out a sigh, equal parts relief and regret. "It's worse than you think." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a high bar," she laughed, short and dry. He spent the first week buying new gadgets, a flat screen for the bedroom, a surround sound system for the den, new suits, 3 of them custom-tailored. "Out of pocket, credit cards," she sipped. "He maxed 2 of them already. The pharmacy called me this week because they couldn't get through to him. He said they were being aggressive." I blinked. "Aggressive? They're asking for $700 in unpaid balances." "I know," she leaned in. "He thought your number was inflated. Until the bills started coming in. Now he's panicking." "Is he trying to fix it?" Taylor stared at her cup for a long second. "He's trying to pretend it's not happening." I didn't respond right away. The noise of the espresso machine hissed in the background, and for a moment I felt an odd peace wash over me. It wasn't joy exactly, not revenge, just relief. He was finally feeling the weight he handed me without flinching, and he couldn't carry it. "You were right, Julia," Taylor said softly. "You tried to hold it all together and they just let you. And now that you're gone," she shook her head. "It's unraveling." I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes weren't angry, they were searching. "He's not a bad person," she added quickly as if afraid she'd gone too far. "He just never had to grow up," I nodded. "Because people like me were always around to clean up after him." She reached across the table, hand brushing mine. "I want you to know something. I'm not staying much longer." I studied her face. "You're leaving him?" She nodded. "I can't raise a family with a man who disappears into himself every time life gets real. I watched you drown in that house. I'm not going to do the same." For a second I didn't know what to say, then I smiled. "A real one. Takes guts." She squeezed my fingers lightly. "Takes watching someone else go first." We sat in silence for a moment, the comfort between us surprising. Two women, bound not by blood but by truth, finally seen, finally heard. "I come here every Tuesday," I said casually. "If you ever want company." "I'll be back next week," she replied, no hesitation. I nodded. "Same time." And just like that, something began to grow in the space where all the pain had lived. Connection, companionship, a new kind of family, the kind you choose. The second Tuesday, Taylor arrived 5 minutes early. Third Tuesday, she brought cookies. The fourth, we didn't even need words to know what the other was thinking. We settled into a rhythm: coffee, quiet honesty, no pretense. Two women with different pasts but a shared ending. It was strange how natural it felt. Easier than anything ever had with my own family. "Any updates?" I asked one morning, nodding toward her phone on the table. Taylor rolled her eyes. "He stopped trying after the third overdue notice. Blamed me for taking your side when I refused to co-sign another loan. I told him I wasn't picking sides, I was just tired of pretending one of them didn't exist." I gave a small laugh. "And your in-laws? They think I corrupted him," she smirked. "Can you believe that, because I asked for groceries and truth in the same breath?" I sipped my coffee slowly. "That's how it works. When you stop shrinking, they say you're attacking," she nodded. "Exactly." Outside the window, the wind pressed bare tree branches against the glass, soft and rhythmic like it was keeping time. I watched a woman walk by holding a toddler's hand, their steps uneven but determined. Something about that, about how we learn to walk beside someone else, hit me unexpectedly. "I bought the townhouse back," I said suddenly. Taylor's head snapped up. "Wait, what?" I smiled. "Right after I left my parents' place. It went back on the market. The buyer's financing fell through. I used my emergency savings, reapplied for a mortgage, and closed last week." "You didn't tell me." "I wanted to make sure it was real. I kept thinking something would go wrong." "Did it?" "No," my smile grew. "For once, it didn't." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Julia, you got your life back." "I did." The words felt strange and solid, like they finally belonged to me. That night, I returned to my townhouse for the first time with no urgency, no guilt. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and breathed in the quiet. The paint still peeled in the hallway, and the heating still clicked when it turned on, but it was mine. The sun dipped below the buildings outside, casting warm light across the living room. I walked from room to room, touching familiar walls, tracing corners I'd once decorated with fairy lights and plans. In the kitchen, I unpacked a single mug. In the bedroom, I lit a candle. Peace didn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrived gently, like a woman coming home to herself. 1 year later, the windows of my townhouse glowed gold with string lights. Warm, gentle, nothing too perfect. Just mine. Taylor stood on a stepstool beside me, unraveling a tangled ribbon of garland. "I swear this stuff multiplies in storage," she muttered, tossing a knot at my feet. I laughed, catching it. "You realize we're not obligated to decorate like it's a holiday catalog, right?" "Oh, I gave up the Pinterest dream months ago," she grinned. "Now I just want to make it feel like home." And it did. The living room smelled like cinnamon and pine. A soft playlist played in the background. 2 mugs of cider steamed on the coffee table beside a bowl of peppermint bark we'd already made a dent in. My little house wasn't fancy, but it was full. Of light, of laughter, of peace. Taylor hung the last ornament, a ceramic bird with a cracked wing. It used to belong to Mom's old collection. She tossed it in the donation box last winter. I pulled it out. Some things deserve to be rescued. Taylor stepped back to admire the tree. You think your parents ever figured out what happened? I didn't even pause. Maybe doesn't matter anymore. We both knew that was true. The lesson had never been about revenge, it was about choice. I chose peace. Over pain, over obligation, over disappearing for people who only ever saw through me. And now I chose me.